what the performance of the system really is. I think that over time, you will see a convergence of some of the measurement products that we think of today as separate categories of product, perhaps between time domain and frequency domain. You will see some of those things coming together into new measurement forms to enable the kinds of applications that we need. Now today, measurement companies like Keysight and our competitors, we're actually making the investments now to ensure that we can intersect the end product roadmaps and the development schedules when we need to. Keysight, for example, is upgrading its captive 3.5 semiconductor fab so that we can produce the mimics that are necessary to power the next generation of test equipment hardware. And other companies are doing their own investments. What about the software? Well, the software in the target environment, in the mobile environment, has also changed dramatically, perhaps more so even than the hardware. It's been said that one of the primary enablers of the very first mobile phone was, in fact, the microprocessor. Because, in fact, until enough computing power could be harnessed in a small enough space and delivered at the right efficiency, the kinds of operations to support mobile, multiple access were not possible. So the microprocessor arrived, and then, of course, a software came with it. When we think about the software systems of those early phones, you know, they managed a very simple user interface, a single line display that was numeric data, a very simple keypad that could be used for entering phone numbers and not much else, and then it controlled the radio in the devices. On the network side, the software managed the automation of the call connection, disconnection, handovers, some level of authentication, and then the billing. And then in the world of test and measurement, when we first dropped microprocessors into our products, we were focused on enabling digital control of the measurement circuits, which then were still primarily analog in nature. We were able to add automatic calibration, which was a huge boon, and in some cases we were able to add a modest level of post-processing on the acquired data to help provide interpretive insight. But when we look back on that environment and all of those realms, we view it really as quite primitive and quite basic indeed. Nothing like what we experience today. So today, at many companies, measurement companies and end product companies, these companies employ more software engineers than they do hardware engineers. And you can think about your own firms or the companies you're knowledgeable of, and you would probably find this to be the case. This reflects the fact that so much of the contribution that's made today in today's products really requires software to fully deliver on the promise that the raw hardware enables. And if you look at the images, the executables for some of these systems, they're just staggering in their size. A modern smartphone, the image, even when compressed, can come to over a gigabyte in size. When you look at the products from my company, some of our advanced instrumentation, it's over 50 gigabytes on the executable image. And if we look at the network software around the system that's running the networks, it's far greater even still. And so I talked about the evolution of that network, how more of the software is being pulled out of function-specific hardware, being made where it can run on standard computing resources. We are seeing some of those same trends play out in our industry. And in fact, we now have software products that have been designed so they can run inside one of our measurement boxes in an embedded fashion. They can run on a connected or disconnected PC and work on previously acquired data. Or in some cases, they can run inside our EDA simulation environments. So now they're starting to move toward that vision of being able to have virtual measurement simulations and emulations as part of the design environment. And we see this continuing going forward. Now, in the network, as Matt had hinted at as well, there will be continuing developments of software. When we look at the demands and the expectations for the 5G experience, while a lot of the raw connectivity will be enabled by new physical layer systems and new hardware, in fact, a lot of the actual experience that occurs moment by moment for users in the network, this is going to have to be controlled by software, both in the devices and in the network software itself, because we're fundamentally talking about a mobile environment. We're talking about an environment where the situation can change potentially very rapidly. There are elements of the big data machine learning paradigm wrapped up into this. Some of these are similar to other big data machine learning applications. Some of them, though, are different because they're fundamentally more real time. And they're going to have to be working very, very quickly in order to get this experience and get the performance that we all want out of 5G. It's the cognitive algorithms that Matt mentioned. And then a similar pattern is playing out in the world of design and test solutions. We see a continued move to separate and virtualize our software from our hardware, where we can run the data analytics and the user interfaces separately from the boxes that provided the raw information, even the modules and the other parts of the transducers. And this is because we want to enable more flexible solutions, more of that interchangeability of virtual for physical assets in the design and in the validation work. We also see elements of the big data machine learning paradigm coming to roost in our world as well, where we're integrating all kinds of measurements from different parts of the system and then trying to make a sense of that. And so we view a lot of our contribution as moving into the software data analytics realm, even as we continue to work on ever faster transducers, better A to D converters, and all the rest. Now, the final element of the model, as I've described it here, is people. People have always been very critical for bringing the contributions of design and test companies into the hands of users. And we see that continuing into the future. But the exact nature of the contribution has shifted somewhat. In the early days of cellular, it was really the radio engineer that was king or queen. As I mentioned before, the validation of the radio circuits was the paramount part of the testing. And so companies like Keysight and our competitors, we went to great extents to build up deep competencies in radio engineering and radio measurements, to where we can design a very precise, very accurate receiver systems and transmitter systems to help provide that validation. That, of course, does continue going forward with things like millimeter wave. There's a whole new level of competency that has to be established there. But at the same time, the move toward digital and software has brought on new requirements for knowledge among our people. Things like digital encoding, decoding, digital modulation and demod, a different protocol knowledge, be it wireless protocol, or in some cases even the computer protocols, the wireline protocols, and then many different types of software, most notably a design simulation software. And so all of these things are part of the expertise that we see our people needing to possess and being able to communicate and bring out to customers for our solutions. It's quite interesting. The need for depth is still there, but the sheer breadth of knowledge that we see being required is rather stunning, actually, when you consider all of these domains. And so how do I see that evolving in the future? Well, I actually see in the world of design and test a continued move towards more of that systems engineering mindset, incorporating multiple measurement domains, multiple types of competencies in order to create solutions. And by solutions, I mean more than just a measurement box, more than just a measurement module that may be running some software. I mean collections of those objects that really help deliver, again, more of a turnkey experience for the customers. When I think of the kind of work that we're doing, for example, in channel sounding, and the type of system that has to be assembled in order to make channel sounding measurements, this is an example of how I see this work evolving into the future. What's interesting about this is that we see a lot of this solution development as needing to occur in deep partnership with customers, especially with first mover customers in a given industry or in a given technology. And that's very exciting to me because it means our engineers will be able to get feedback on their work much more quickly than they have in the past. Instead of having to wait 1, 2, 3 years to have your product go to market and get feedback on whether or not it delivered value to the customers, they're going to be able to get it on a much faster cycle rhythm, to be able to adjust and optimize and really maximize the impact that the measurement solution has on the business of the customer. This is very exciting. Now, this does have some implications for how we recruit our people, how we develop them and foster their careers, but we're actually starting down this kind of a path at Keysight, and I find it very exciting. So, having sketched out a little bit about how I see hardware and software and people contributions evolving in service of the development labs that are working to make that 2025 vision a reality, I just want to offer a comment here that we often talk about 5G and how much is evolutionary versus how much is revolutionary. And Matt touched on this as well. I think in many cases what is seen as revolutionary from a certain distance or a certain altitude, upon closer inspection, actually has elements that look more evolutionary in nature. It still consists of a series of steps. Sometimes the steps are bigger and more closely spaced than they otherwise would be, but the fact that they are steps means that we can continue to make incremental progress. And this is very important to a measurement company, to an engineering company, because we always want to be supporting the continued progress. Now, after the fact, I think some of those steps will rightly come to be viewed as revolutionary in nature. But we're going to make progress as we transition from that 4G environment into some of the hybrid modes that will exist for quite some time, and then fully into 5G and beyond. So having said all of that, and with all respect to the value of making predictions, and to all of the people like myself this week that are making some predictions, I've learned in 29 years in the business that in fact making predictions on the details of how some of these developments unfold is very, very challenging. And personally, I tend to be more skeptical the more detailed the predictions become. And we've all have examples of where things have been improperly predicted. I pulled a few here that you may recognize and you may get a chuckle over. Here's one about the very first telephone. Obviously, it was a wired telephone. This is 140 years ago, coming from a telegraph company. Imagine that. Here's one about aerial flight, really winged flight, right at the time the Wright brothers were coming on the scene. By the way, this is the same William Thomson, the same Lord Kelvin, who I introduced at the beginning with that other quote. He looks older here because this was 19 years later. But in this case, he was dead wrong about the future of aviation. Here's one from Albert Einstein about nuclear energy. And then finally, years ago at the beginning of my career, I worked at IBM. Here's one from one of the past CEOs of IBM on the market for computers. So we look back on these things and we see that these are all cases where the appetite or the market interest in a new technology was fundamentally underestimated. But we all can think of examples where the opposite has occurred. In fact, all you have to do is look to Silicon Valley, to all of the failed entrepreneurs that are out there, to find examples where the appetite for their new technology or their new innovation, they had fundamentally overestimated what the interest would be. So the errors can happen both ways. And at the end of the day, I tend to agree with Niels Bohr, who said, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. Now, I think Yogi Berra actually made a version of this same statement. But this is, in fact, the case. And so I'm going to attempt to skirt the odds a little bit today and make what amounts to a meta prediction. When I think about 5G and I think about test and measurement and what's going to be required, my meta prediction is there are going to be challenges that occur that we can in no way foresee today. They're going to come up unexpectedly. They're going to be things that result from new applications or new understandings of the technology that unfold along the way, and we're not going to be able to anticipate them. But I believe that's okay, because the other part of the meta prediction is that companies like Keysight and others in our industry, we will help rise to the challenge to get the needs met, to make the measurements, to continue to foster the innovation that you all and your customers need to do in order to make the 5G vision a reality. This is what we do. It's why we're engaged in so many ways in the industry at events like Globecom. And as one example, I just pulled this from something that occurred last week. Right here in San Diego, we partnered with developers at the University of California to light up a new link. There were different versions of the experiment. Some of them went up to 200 meters in length. Some of them went up to 2 gigabits of data transmit. They had a wide range of carrier frequencies. But the really novel element was the use of wafer scale integration to create a multi-element phased array antennas. 64 elements in one case and then 256 in another case. Now, this work was not planned years in advance. It was not roadmapped in any sense of that word. And once it began, there were numerous obstacles and numerous curveballs that came up on the way toward getting the thing operational. But that didn't stop the teams. The teams confronted the challenges, figured out how to work around them, and ultimately were able to get this link functioning in a very impressive way. This is an example of what is going to play out hundreds and thousands of times between now and 2025 as the design and test industry interacts with the people who are enabling the next generation of the mobile environment. And companies like Keysight and others in our space, we're just very excited to be able to play our role and to continue to support all of that innovation.